All right. Thanks for coming to Finding the Warmth of Our Sun. I am Matthew Brongen, your host here at Madison 365. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. So a quick correction from last week. I said that Rittenhouse brought the gun over state lines. In testimony, his friend said that he kept the gun in a safe for him in Kenosha. Well, kind of two quick things on that. One, I'm not necessarily going to believe the testimony of his friend or that it can't be wrong. And two, remember that the preface wasn't really about the details of the case per se. It was much more about how the judge was behaving in how he approached the case, as well as a just general idea that somebody could show up to a protest with a gun, a specific weapon, this weapon, the AR-15, designed to hunt and kill humans. That's what it was designed for, specifically as a weapon of war, as a weapon of human death, to brandish it, to point it at multiple people, and then claim that the other person was the aggressor. Like, it boggles my mind that the openly carrying a weapon of death is yourself being aggressive. Like that is the initial aspect of that, particularly in the mentality of threatening human life over property, and not even their own property, like corporate property. But again, just wanted to do that. I don't like, even if it's not something that supports, what I'm trying to say, mistakes on that. And then specifically also, there's, something about him, that anyways, I'm not going to rehash any of that. Just wanted to make that correction. But this week going to be covering a couple rounds of news that you might have missed, particularly one, which hasn't gotten much, if any, national press outside of Vice News in late November. And I think this was missed over Thanksgiving weekend, and local press down in Georgia were able to pick up on it. So what we're looking at here, within Georgia and what happened, 24 people were arrested in Georgia for running slave labor and human trafficking. So what happened? Over 100 laborers were smuggled from Mexico and Central America into brutal and inhuman working conditions in South Georgia. Much of this is being taken from Vice News as well as the Atlanta Journal and Courier. They were forced to work under the threat of gun violence. At least two people died on the jobs, and at least one person was repeatedly raped. These people dug for onions with their bare hands, for pennies on the dollar for each bucket. Others were forced to do lawn care, construction, and restaurant work, and others were threatened with violence or deportation. Particularly, this is according to the indictment. All while, they were lived in cramped and dirty conditions, little to no food or clean water. Workers were also even unlawfully sold and traded to other people within this crime ring. They called it a transnational criminal organization, described as Patricio TCO. It's named after one of the main people involved. They made more than $200 million as part of this scheme. And they're essentially really using how they're operating is they're using the H-2A visa program to get people from Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras into the United States under the pretext of being agricultural workers, abusing and then exploiting these laborers to make money once they were stateside, laundering the proceedings through big cash purchases, cashier's checks, and a casino. Starting in 2015 is when it's, at least at the earliest, it seems like that's when they were in. This organization sent multiple false petitions to the government seeking over 71,000 laborers for agricultural employer. So basically, they're saying the feds are saying they are aware somewhere around 70,000 who have come in under this program fraudulently. So basically, 70,000 people who were human trafficked under this program probably existing as slave laborers, and they have 100 actual victims in the district they're able to locate. This is enabled by our government's immigration programs and our mishandling of immigration, partly as well as our international or our foreign policies towards South American countries, which create these conditions of mass migration and instability within these nations, and mass violence within some of these nations, as well as coups that we've been directly responsible for, which leads to this. On top of corruption that is enabled by, most of the time, U.S.-based corporations, a lot of times to knock down the rainforest for farmland and other material to enable U.S.-friendly policies within these nations, or what we mean as U.S. corporate interests. Additionally, also, our lack of infrastructure to process these migrants in a humane way and let them in the United States. People are, it's fall into the fear mongering. A lot of moderates fall into this as well, and white folks are particularly susceptible to this. The fear mongering of these mass migrants and these migrant trains, but most of it's not like they're coming over and there might be some waves, some overwhelming, but if we had infrastructure to actually intake and process these people in entering the country, giving them identification, making it so that there is much less incentive for human traffickers to get people inside the country, as people are desperate to get here, for a variety of different reasons. If we create a much more robust mechanism to allow people in this country, this wouldn't happen. If we allow a much more robust mechanism to allow people in this country, a lot of the fear these people have of these people, white folks predominantly, of these migrants might dissipate, but the very idea of letting more brown people into this country is scary to folks, even so-called, liberals, as it is, they fall into this fear-mongering. We have the xenophobia in this country is so deeply rooted that it is very easy for people to fall back into these base fears of the other, the outsider coming in to sow crime, to take jobs, that creates, that just breaks things apart. People are scared, but these are misfound fears. And I mean, all the data tells us this. These are misfound fears. And in fact, immigration is good. The more resistant we are to it, the more trouble it's going to cause us domestically. Particularly, it is within our own self-interest to be open and easy within immigration, and having many official channels for people to immigrate from. And it stops these horrific things, or at least prevents these horrific things from happening to people. But we can't do that. And Biden is maintaining a lot of Trump's immigration policies, particularly remain in Mexico. They've turned away people that have been claiming asylum, particularly from Haiti. It's despicable, it's deplorable, it's inhumane, it's illegal, it's crimes against humanity. Biden, Trump, Obama, George W. Bush, Clinton. I mean, all these folks can be tried for warrants for crimes against humanity, as well as war crimes as well. If that is, our politicians were able to be held accountable for their actions, as well as our own corporate folks. Which leads us to the second thing. And really these two things, they highlight how really broken this country is. in fundamental ways, from its people to its politicians to its leaders. So this next news story: the coup had a PowerPoint. Mark Meadows, Trump's White House chief of staff, handed over a PowerPoint to the January 6th commission about a plan to overturn the 2020 election. This PowerPoint recommended Trump declare a national emergency. It laid out 3 different ways they wanted Pence to overturn the election and maintain Trump as president. And as we know, Pence declined to take up these options and certify the election. And he decided to certify the election. Now, there's other stuff that's out there. Like, this is a huge, massive story, particularly as we still have senators and Republican House members that are encouraging and pushing along this big lie that the 2020 election was stolen. What this is doing is it helps perpetuate. They're preparing for the next coup attempt. They're preparing for next anti-democratic posturing in for the next elections, which is next fall. Pence, some details we should know is during the insurrection, he refused to get into a car that was being driven by the Secret Service because he did not trust them that he would survive the car ride. He trusted his own personal bodyguard, but not the Secret Service in there because he feared they're involved. What more does he know? Why did he fear this? The insurrectionists were also coming to hang Pence. We know that Congress people were in contact on civilian phones, on burners, with people from the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers that were very well organized within the insurrection. We know that they had maps of the tunnels. We know that people, senior staff inside the White House, and people close to Trump, such as some of his kids, also had burner phones communicating with people that were going to be attending the insurrection. We also know the Proud Boys, a month prior, visited the White House with Trump and tweeted out to be prepared on January 6th, as these people openly plotted this coup attempt. Well, we don't have a hard direct line to Trump per se. We have a lot of smoking guns that he wanted to participate in a coup, but more so between the insurrectionists and Trump. But we have a lot of hard lines between the insurrectionists, people around Trump, and to people in Congress who seem to know about things going on. There's a lot of unanswered questions that have been floating around. There seems to be a lot of things also floating around January 5th. One thing that did come out of all of this recently that is, again, interesting to note, on January 5th, Kanye's West publicist pressed the Georgia election worker to confess to bogus fraud charges. Kanye West publicist said to confess to Trump's voter fraud allegations, or people would come to her home in 48 hours and she would go to jail. They added, "You are a loose end for a party that needs to tidy up." Federal people were involved, and the person added without, offering specifics. We have people such as Bannon and Mike Flynn still out there, and Roger Stone, organizing for the next coup attempt, organizing to get people into elected positions, particularly at the local level, to be able to overturn elections. GOP members looking to oversee electors so they can overturn elections. Mike Flynn is openly calling for Republican voters to mass murder. He said mass murder. Political rivals and other Americans. They are openly plotting for violence, and our elected leaders are kind of blasé about this. We don't have, our government and are not going after these folks. Garland is not hardcore going after these folks. They are taking their time. They're not protecting the integrity of our elections either. This is scary. And we have a lot of folks out there that are somehow both siding stuff between radical liberals and so-called woke people that are wanting people to be treated as fully human. And yeah, right? Like we have these like white moderates talking about like you can't talk about pronouns and what about this? Well, we have these strong fascist forces. I mean, it's just it's maddeningly frustrating how blasé so much of our particularly white populations here, even on the left, are to the anti-democratic forces in this country. People that are more concerned, like Joe out in West Virginia, Manchin, whatever his name is, senator, about inflation. Wrong ideas about inflation, mind you. The Build Back Better plan and economic investments aren't the reason for this inflation, and it's even short-term type of. It's not anything really. It doesn't seem like anything really to be concerned about long-term wise, and Biden's economic agendas aren't causing it. Like they just aren't. They aren't. It's not to be concerned. It's a BS excuse, and a lot of these folks are aligned to a economic ideology that has been disproven over and over and over again in the last 30, 40 years. It's maddening. Again, maddening. This country is absolutely mad and breaking apart, and is our leaders are inept. So many of our populists, particularly those that have a voice, are inept and are more concerned about protecting the status quo than they are about the anti-democratic forces and fascist forces of the right that are quite violent and openly calling for violence and the murder of other Americans and their Democratic colleagues. We have people running for office saying that they are going to, this one person was special forces and hunted down people in Benghazi and said he's going to hunt down the communists in America. And you have these white moderates giving protection to these folks by somehow calling the fact that some people want to hold others accountable for being racist, that want to engage in conversations around CRT, that want to protect democracy by expanding voting rights, are just as bad. Just get out of here. I mean, honestly, when you study the history of Reconstruction and its failure, when you look at pre-World War II Europe, you see a lot of themes. And what you see are people that are concerned about the wrong things because they would much rather protect the status quo than fully embrace a changing country, particularly in this country, fully embracing a multicultural democracy. And it's hard. It's hard. So be upset at these folks. Persistently point out the anti-democratic forces. Anybody that downplays it, push back on them, particularly journalists. Hound them for why they're not covering Ron Johnson as somebody who persistently advocates anti-democratic forces and violent white supremacist forces in this country, who actively has supported a coup attempt in this country. These people should be hounded, not just hound the journalists, but also hound these elected representatives. These elected representatives should have no quarter from these journalists who are just calling so-called balls and strikes. We are not collectively alarmed enough about the rise of fascism in this country. Hate to end on that, but do have some exciting things for you heading into next year. Going to be doing a couple of fun interviews over the next couple of weeks that we're going to be kicking off the new year with. I'm going to be, new episodes are going to be taking a break until January, but definitely going to be getting some good things in the bag for y'all that are going to be fun. One, we're going to be talking about stuff locally, and another is going to be exploring this really cool book called The Bright Ages that just released, which explores different aspects It's really a survey of modern medievalism or medievalists and how they've studied medieval Europe and peeled back layers of these myths and falsities that our larger cultural consciousness generally holds on to about it. It's a fascinating and great book. But we'll bring it to the present and why it matters in this retelling of history of different perspectives. And in a lot of ways, it's the similarities with it within the 1619 project in this retelling of history and centering of different perspectives about this and peeling back these layers of different stories, of happenings, of engaging in history in a different way than what we've largely done it over the last couple centuries. Because the way we've done it has been very, very limiting in how we've looked at the world and engaged the world. Not exactly wrong, but very narrow in perspective. So this is about taking a wider perspective of our history, which helps us understand it better and helps us understand why we are where we are better. Even this book, The Bright Ages, helps us understand ourselves better because there's so much that influences this country and Western Europe and how they've engaged the world over the last 150 years that you can see the seeds here. And even in how they've engaged historically medieval history or the Middle Ages has been a way as well to help justify certain aspects of the colonial and imperial world that came from Europe. But that is it. I hope y'all have a happy New Year, happy holidays, happy Christmas. Hope folks that celebrate Hanukkah had a good one. Whatever else you're going to be celebrating, do that. And or any folks that are non-theistic or atheist, hope you have a good time with this break and spending time with loved ones and families, no matter what. So yeah. Have a good one. Stay safe. Mask up. And see y'all next year.
This is 365 Media.